Devika completed her engineering from the National Institute of Technology, Karnataka, and worked at City before she got acquainted with the Good Food Initiative. She actually got introduced to GFI through the Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. Today she is going to be talking about the smart protein sector in India, more on the problem, the challenges, and potential solutions to the same. With that, I welcome Devika. Over to you.
Sorry about that. Hi everyone, I'm Devika. I'm the Innovation Associate at the Good Food Institute India. It's a pleasure to be amongst all of you today. And like Yashasvi mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about smart protein, a sector that I find truly exciting as the future of food. I'm hoping to give you all a sort of an introduction into the field, what the landscape in India looks like, what it looks like globally, how it's different. What are the specific challenges in India that really is a white space right now for people like you and me to come in and solve? Okay. I will start us off with a simple question. What is your fondest food memory? Think it over, take a minute. I'm sure it'll be quite easy seeing as we are very close to lunch. I'm thinking about food as well. While you guys think it over, I will own up and accept my food memory, and the reason that I say own up is because as a vegan of 3 years, it's quite humbling to know that my fondest food memory is the Sunday chicken biryani that my mom used to make. That's not really changed. It's still the fondest food memory for me. And rightfully so, because food in itself is no longer just sustenance. It's identity, it's culture, it's habit, it's craving. Which is also why a lot of our fondest memories are also our earliest memories. A lot of our food decisions are not rational or well thought out. That being said, what is the power of your plate? What is the power of what you choose to eat? We are at a point in time wherein what you choose to put on your plate really has the potential to move the needle on some of the most pressing issues of our times. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. Global meat demand has been on the rise for decades now and shows no signs of slowing down. In fact, it's being driven by the global south. It's the emerging economies of India, China, Southeast Asia, where the population is getting increasingly upwardly mobile, increasingly urbanized, where rising incomes makes this aspirational, delectable product that meat is to be consumed more. India, with its 1.4 billion strong, soon to be largest population in the world, contrary to popular misconception, is not predominantly vegetarian. In fact, the recent National Family and Health Survey showed that 71% Indians attest to eating non-vegetarian food once a week. And the factors that impede them from consuming more meat is not cultural or religious sentiments as one might imagine, it's just income. People just don't have the money to eat more of meat. If they did, they would. This goes to show that meat consumption in India is currently purely driven by taste, indulgence, aspiration, more than any other consideration. Now, why should we care about this growing meat appetite amongst Indians? Industrial animal agriculture lies at this very close intersection of many of the most pressing challenges that humanity faces today. Climate change, environmental degradation, food insecurity, malnutrition, public and animal health. And we know that developing countries like India would disproportionately bear the negative consequences of these issues. Let's look a little deeper into some of these issues. Industrial animal agriculture is the leading contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for a whopping 14.5%, which is higher than the share of the total transportation sector put together. Even if fossil fuel emissions were immediately halted right now, global protein production alone would make meeting the Paris Agreement's targets impossible. Further, according to the UNDP, developing countries will suffer 99% of the casualties of climate change, despite the fact that the 50 least developed countries only contribute to 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. India is currently the 5th most vulnerable country when it comes to climate change. When it comes to food insecurity and rising malnutrition, we really need to talk about the inefficient way in which we're producing food right now and how we can't continue in the same strain. From the diagram, it's pretty clear that while 77% of agricultural land is used for raising and feeding livestock, it only provides 1/3 of the global protein supply. So why do we keep feeding the middleman that is the animal? Further, cycling calories through animals as a production of food results in about 90% food waste, which could go towards feeding our growing, rising malnutrient population. Chicken is the most efficient animal when it comes to calorie conversion, and yet it requires 9 calories of feed to provide 1 calorie of meat. Industrial animal agriculture diverts massive quantities of crops away from direct human consumption and towards animal feed. Finally, when it comes to public health, antibiotic-resistant bacteria are amongst the gravest human threats that we face today. Overuse of antibiotics in animal agriculture, be it as growth promoters, medicines, just to keep meat healthy when they're grown in such subhuman conditions, is the reason why we will reach a point where common illnesses like cough and cold will become untreatable. All of this brings us to the fundamental question: how do we feed 10 billion people, 1/6 of whom would be Indian, by 2050, sustainably, efficiently, and safely? This is not something we haven't heard before. Every conference, every podcast, every dialogue around food security will come down to this question. We will always go back to how we need to produce vastly more food in vastly better ways. But none of this is inevitable. We can't continue producing food the way that we do right now. It demands our collective ingenuity and determination to transform our current system of food. We need a complete paradigm shift, and we need it now. This is a great segue for me to start talking about my work and the work that we do at GFI India. We are a global network of non-profit think tanks that are looking at reimagining protein production. We work with stakeholders across the value chain, so across business, science, and policy, talent, entrepreneurs, investors, value chain stakeholders, everyone who's looking to diversify our current protein sources for a more secure, sustainable, and just food system. We primarily work across business, science, and policy. I come from the business vertical, so I work within the innovation department. What innovation does is we equip any startup hopeful in the space with anything that they would require to bring products to market. So right from ideation up until launch. We put you in touch with funds, we put you in touch with talent, we put you in touch with product development partners. Within business, we also have a corporate engagement team. So we work with the Nestlés, the ITCs, the Unilevers of the world who are trying to align and enter the space. They have globally, and we try to put them in touch with the correct stakeholders in India so that they can do the same here. Our sci-tech team is a team of researchers and scientists who are trying to put out open access research in a nascent field like smart protein. They also work with university ecosystems, many of which you guys are from, to put out optional coursework as well as build certification programs and divert funds towards smart protein. Our policy team are regulatory experts who are trying to build the regulatory pathway for smart protein. Right now, the regulator does not recognize smart protein as a category in itself. We're trying to make the policy framework such that it's easier to bring products to market. Our theory of change at GFI India is to meet consumer demand for meat, eggs, dairy that they know and love in a way that is better for people, the planet, as well as better for business. Over time, over these talks, people have always talked about how you need to shift to a more plant-based diet. It's kind of rewrought in every discussion that we have had. That doesn't mean that you guys are going to go back from this talk and all go vegan. I don't think that's going to happen. We've recognized that at GFI India, and we've recognized that we need to provide people with alternatives that actually work, that people actually want to crave and eat and enjoy. Instead of asking consumers to give up the foods that they know and they love and that they've grown up eating, we want to accelerate the translation to an alternative that's produced in a more sustainable and efficient way, which do not compromise on taste, on price, on convenience. We want to provide a simple switch and not a sacrifice. Smart proteins broadly fit into these three modalities, which is plant-based, fermentation-derived, and cultivated. I can get into a little bit about all of them without diving too deep into the science. Plant-based protein, in its essence, is products that are trying to biomimic meat in its texture, in its sensory capabilities, in its nutritional aspects, so that they look, taste, feel, cook like conventional meat. Cultivated meat, on the other hand, is genuine meat, just produced in a lab and not inside an animal's body. They're composed of the same cell types and the same sort of 3D dimensional kind of structure within an animal's body. It's just produced in a much more efficient manner. Fermentation has now emerged as a key enabling technology that provides functional ingredients that can complement both plant-based as well as cultivated meat. It's also worth noting that over time, we think that all these different modalities will kind of coalesce into one, wherein we'll have more hybrid products in the market. So one of the most well-known products that you guys might have heard about is the Impossible Burger, which is predominantly plant-based, but also has fermentation-derived hemoglobin content, which allows them to provide a burger that bleeds, which might not be the target for India, but it works for them. This is what the plant-based smart protein sector looks like, or the landscape looks like right now in India. It's not complete, it's not exhaustive, but there's more than 60 brands in the space right now. They might not be at your local Kirana store, but they are across channels. They're in D2C, they're in e-commerce. You can try them on Swiggy, Instamart. But there's definitely a lot more that's left to be done in this space. When we're talking about the road ahead for smart protein, we're really thinking about how to advance the market, how to create a category that simply doesn't exist right now. So this essentially means that we need to look at the consumer. What are the drivers for consumption? What makes them tick? What makes them buy and try a product and then come back and try it again? And this looks vastly different from our counterparts in the West. I will pause there for a second for any questions as of now. I'm reading the room and getting no, so I'm going to continue. So I'm going to really get into who the consumer is for these products. Is it you and me? Is it the true mass market, as we call it? So right now, we are very much restricted to the early adopter category. Now, what that looks like is your upwardly mobile, urbanized, Tier 1, Tier 2 city population that has the dispensable income to go out and try these products. These products right now are at a 1.5 to 2x premium compared to their animal-derived counterparts. So you would require that dispensable income to really go out and try these products. And when talking about what the opportunity really is, brands are no longer looking at a niche of a vegetarian or a vegan market, because the opportunity really is with the omnivores and the flexitarians. Flexitarians being people who predominantly eat plant-based and try to restrict their meat intake just because of the growing awareness around the issues that surrounds animal agriculture. We see that it's this guilty non-vegetarian cohort that's really trying to eat more of these products, and we always advise brands to kind of position their products because these people look like you or me. We probably watched the Game Changers documentary and now just really, really want to eat better. While health, ethics, environmental concerns is what brings a lot of these consumers into the market to try these products, it's really taste, price, and convenience that keeps products stick. At the end of the day, if you're going to give me a product that costs 1.5x times as much as a meat product and it simply doesn't taste as good, I'm not going to buy it again. And this is coming from someone who has serious buy-in in the sector. Taste being the primary factor, there's a lot of dimensions when it comes to taste, specifically in India. In the West, there is a hero category when it comes to meat. It's usually center of plate, it's protein, it's your burger, your sausage. And in India, it simply doesn't look that way. We'll need to provide formats that are biryanis or, Goan prawn curry, and it'll just need to be a lot more versatile and adaptable when it comes to India. Another consideration when you're trying to mimic the taste aspect is that you'll really have to provide the complete gastronomical experience. Food is more than just diets, like we spoke about earlier. For meat, our qualitative data shows that people really want to bite into a succulent piece of meat. If you're having mutton, they want to be able to suck out the marrow. I don't want to get too graphic with that. If it's dairy, they really want to see their chai kind of boil over. These are all the functional aspects of products that we're simply not there yet, and we have a long way ahead to go. To see products improve in taste and price, we really need to innovate on multiple fronts, and we need to really plug in to these different white space opportunities. While we saw significant investment in the sector despite a global pandemic, you see that India's figure is barely a marginal fraction of the global sum, and poses really a huge opportunity as well as a challenge. Speaking of investment, while smart protein should increasingly be recognized as core part of climate tech, there is a clear disparity in the amount of investment flowing into, say, electronic vehicles when the global greenhouse gas emissions are comparable. We need to establish smart protein as an investable green asset, every bit as impactful and profitable as renewable energy. This is exactly what we tried to do with a study that we conducted with Deloitte in terms of what is the market size and opportunity for a sector as nascent as India. This is a question that we get asked by startup hopefuls, by investors who are looking to enter the sector and are feeling quite hesitant. We see that there is an economic opportunity upwards of $4 billion by 2030 with the right intervention and a path to 10x further growth by 2040. A large, diverse population with rising protein demand creates a significant domestic addressable market within India. There are promising initial signs for the sector, but we really need a coordinated effort across business, science, and policy stakeholders to come together to really push forward the market. Some of the unique white space opportunities that we see that India can really plug into really comes from our large crop biodiversity. So a lot of the smart protein products in the market right now are heavily dependent on soy and wheat. Where India can really plug into is on our pulses front. We are the largest producers as well as importers of pulses, which is ridiculous. It means that we have a real gap when it comes to the processing side of things. We're not able to bring up the protein content of our ingredients. There's huge losses across the supply chain, all opportunities for us to solve for. Despite that, we also have a burgeoning biotech as well as a rapidly growing food processing industry that we can really push and plug into. India has the capacity to bring down cost basis for the global sector, and we've seen that with other tech like vaccines. And we can really plug into that when it comes to smart protein. The third advantage that I'm really excited for is that we've always had the availability of excellent resourceful talent that are highly capable of working in dynamic environments. So be it in a startup capacity or coming into a sector and really just hitting the ground running, we really have that talent within our ecosystems. So as part of our economic analysis, we also did a talent mapping. We looked at allied sectors and really tried to size what the job opportunity for a space like smart protein could look like. So we really need to build this dedicated, robust talent pool across the sector. We need individuals trained across various disciplines of business, sci-tech, and policy with complementary skill sets at various stages of their careers filling into these roles. So coming to GFI India's initiatives, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about this because I see that people really want to get started with the sector and we want to provide avenues where you can just immediately plug in. So our networks and our resources kind of look like this. We have a GFI Indias India community. So it's a 1,000-member community of startups, investors, anyone across the value chain just really trying to get to know more about smart protein and advance the space. We also have a dedicated talent community that we plug with employers in the space when they're looking to hire impactful talent. We also have a mass online open course that you can go into just to get like a Smart Protein 101 refresher. A new initiative that we have just launched is the Alt Protein project, which is run globally out of university ecosystems. There are 20 Alt Protein projects globally, and we launched the first India chapter, which is the Smart Protein project, which is centered around Delhi University, and we'll be expanding to Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore in the coming year. Another way that you can really get involved with us is through our Smart Protein Summit as well as the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. I am a product of the challenge. I was part of the first iteration of the challenge. We really focus on building ventures through the challenge, as well as there's a talent track really focused on trying to build sector experience. So it's very hard to find internships or career prospects in a space that's so niche, where there's no proof of concept in terms of what should someone working in the sector look like. So we're trying to build capstone projects which would last over 6 months that you can do with a mentor or a corporate partner in the space to really understand what it's like to work in this space. So the next iteration of the challenge will be launched in June. I'm happy to provide any more information on any of our initiatives. Thank you.
I'm Felipe from Brazil. Nice to meet you. This was a beautiful presentation, beautiful slides, by the way.
Thank you.
One thing that I wanted to know is, what are the entry barriers for producing alternative meat? And have we already reached a level of technological development in which opening a business in this field is actually accessible to small and medium entrepreneurs? Or is this still restricted to the big shots in business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to answer that with looking at it from an India lens, because the landscape just looks vastly different in the West. A lot of the kind of ecosystem stack that you need to build up when you're an entrepreneur in the space, like who do I contact, what do I do, where do I get started, simply doesn't exist in India. Because it's just not a sector, it's not a priority. So while the technology stack exists in, say, a researcher within like an IIT, it's not been commercialized yet. And that's what we're trying to solve for. We're working with a bunch of these researchers. There is a university in Bangalore, private university, that's looking just focused on like the extrusion texturization piece, which will bring meats, plant-based meat, to kind of taste and feel the same as their animal-derived counterpart. So we're really having to kind of build it out on a grassroots level, which could seem quite challenging, but I feel like the power in startups is that they're dynamic. In India, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of, I would say, longer lead times when it comes to corporates launching brands. So we have an ITC in the space. We could potentially have like a Nestle or a Unilever in the space. But the kind of market testing that requires and the turnaround time there is really large. So much so that they're not able to kind of beta test a lot of their products. So we've seen a lot of corporates come into the space and fail, whereas we've seen a lot of smaller brands come in and really thrive because they're able to really iterate and make their products better and work with like university ecosystems. So IP also becomes a huge issue when it comes to corporations. So I see the sector kind of having a mix of both corporate as well as startups. A lot of startups in the space are also working purely to get absorbed by a lot of these corporates. So yeah, it's a mixed bag when it comes to India.
Yeah, thanks for the talk, Devika. So my question was, is there some kind of ballpark figure for what percentage of total meat consumption is actually done by the group of people you would consider to be early adopters? Because based off of the demographic profile you've described, I would also guess that these are people who are probably likely to have a higher amount of meat consumption than the rest of the population. And then are there any considerations in terms of scaling it out from this group towards the rest of the population that are important to take into account early on from this point, let's say?
Yeah, no, great question. We've not done any kind of sizing in terms of consumption patterns. We're yet to do that. But surprisingly so, you would see like the mass market population really looks at meat as aspiration and has it at least once a week. It's a celebration. And you would see that they are really trying to kind of plug in and have more meat as time goes by. Dairy, on the other hand, completely different story. The inroads and the barriers to entry there are much higher. And in terms of, I'm sorry, your second question was reaching the true mass market, right? Yeah, so the real barriers right now is in terms of price, as you can imagine, because India is a heavily price-conscious market. When it comes to bringing down cost bases, we'll have to plug in at every section of the value chain. So if you look at a plant-based meat product, you are sourcing your ingredients, you're optimizing it so that it has the highest protein content. So when we say a chickpea flour, it's not a besan. It is a highly optimized protein concentrate that has like a 90% protein upgrade. And that tech really doesn't exist in India right now. We have a few startups that are working in the space trying to build that out, but we really need more people working at that section of the value chain and not just rushing to market with a bunch of products. A lot of the products in the market right now are also very much emulating the West. We have chicken nuggets and we have like chicken strips, which is not what we need. We need like curry cuts that your mother can cook with, right? So there's a lot of barriers there. Also in terms of, I guess, the regulatory landscape. So a lot of these ingredients right now are being imported. There's a high tariff on that import as well. So we're working with the regulator to bring that down. And in terms of tech, like I mentioned before, it exists within university ecosystem, so you can't really scale it up. We really need corporate buy-in for a lot of this to be scaled up. And even when it comes to the accessibility part of things, we don't have the logistics to get a lot of these products which are frozen and chilled, and the supply chain there for any sector looks quite distributed. So a lot of different factors, and our work is really cut out for us, but we do see some kind of use cases wherein it would make a lot of sense for India to take a slightly different path, in the sense that we needn't really try to mimic meat to its T. A lot of the drivers right now is also nutrition. So if you're able to provide an alternative. So if you know that the Nutrella soya chunks does really well, right? They are not a mock meat. Like we wouldn't consider it like an alternative. But they really sell within the true mass market. So should we be positioning it such that you're providing like nutritional quality, but it's just not there yet when it comes to taste. So overall, I think the case for India looks very different from the West. So you can't just follow the same model.
Hello, Devika.
Hi.
I'm Arpit. Thank you for the presentation. I don't know if I should ask this, but can you briefly explain the process of making fermented meat? Like what you guys use? Like, do you guys use any fungi or something? Or like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry. And my second question is, you mentioned there's a course in Delhi University. Actually, I'm in Delhi University, so I am kind of interested. So if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, great questions. I am not a sci-tech expert, so I will give you like the kind of overview. So essentially it is using or selecting strains of bacteria and fungi and growing and optimizing protein through that. There's 3 different types of fermentation derived processes. There's biomass, there's precision fermentation, there's traditional fermentation methods, the kind that we brew beer out of. So there's a lot of companies working on these different strains. In India, they're mostly looking like a B2B play. We don't have the regulatory landscape right now to push for these products to be consumable. Same with the cultivated meat sector. So in India right now, it's a bunch of companies working on like scaffolding or like feedstock or like what goes into the bioreactor. So it's very much like a tech play in India. In terms of the course, so it's not a course per se, it's a university group that's trying to build out coursework as well as do tech transfer within the university ecosystem. So right now we have Stephens, I think we have Gargi College, we have Hindu. We are expanding to I think Ashoka as well as NIFTIM. So yeah, I will put you in touch with the right people.
I wanted to know maybe a comparison, India and globally. Where does most of the funding come from? Is it private funding or public funding? And specifically in India, how does the government respond to the idea of investing more in this field?
Yeah, no, great question. I think globally it's a mix of private and public, which is why the numbers are huge, because a huge amount of public funding also goes into the space. There is a mandate in certain countries to push for novel fields. So if you know Singapore, for instance, by 2030, they're trying to kind of localize the food that they produce. So smart protein would be great inroads for that. We don't have that per se in India. We really have to, when we represent to the government, we are really kind of explaining what smart protein is from scratch, because for a country that's focused on nutrition and poverty, this doesn't seem like high up on the agenda. But we're trying to see where we can plug the government's mandate in terms of, improving crop diversity or building the talent pool or kind of scaling up the infrastructure that we have and show them that we can become kind of global leaders in the space when it comes to the B2B space. We might not be the end consumer market, but we could be providing for the world when it comes to the tech, when it comes to talent, when it comes to the ingredients. So that's really looking like our focus in the near term, because we simply don't see a lot of products entering the market that might fit all the criteria that we see in the West. And when it comes to the investment side of things, we have seen a lot of VC interest from India, especially climate-focused funds. They kind of understand the landscape and what impact it has in the long term. But we really need patient capital for the space right now, I would say. At least for plant-based, it's a little more like the barrier to entry is kind of lower. You really do see your product hit the market within like a year or so. But when it comes to fermentation cultivated, the gestation period for something like that is 4 or 5 years. We don't even have the regulatory clearances to sell something like that. So you're really kind of betting on the founder, you're betting on the deep tech expertise. So we do see a lot of investor hesitation, especially in the wake of an economic downturn, I'm not going to lie. But I think at the end of the day, they're really focusing on scale up. Like, are we able to take this tech that's in university and bring it maybe to a global market? A lot of the plant-based companies right now are extensively plugging into global markets. In fact, some of the founders that we work with are simply getting incorporated in Singapore because it just makes a lot of sense from a regulatory clearance point of view.
Two related questions from a public policy angle. So one, for precision fermentation, I would be curious to know what the regulatory status of GM-derived precision fermentation ingredients is in India. And then the other one was, like, what are the major bottlenecks for the production and processing of some of these really key ingredient crops, like pea, for example?
Yeah. So on your precision fermentation question, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going to answer to my knowledge. So right now, I think we're trying to push for it as a processing aid, as like an ingredient that goes into the process as opposed to like a end product. We have a company, we have Perfect Day set up in India who is working on precision fermentation, and they're kind of localizing a lot of their R&D in India. And they have gotten regulatory clearance for one ingredient that they're working on. So it is looking up. In terms of, what was your second question?
So it was specifically about kind of any systemic barriers towards the increase in farming and processing of crops that are very important for plant-based, like pea, for example.
Yeah. So honestly, we've done some research which shows that only 8% of our total crop biodiversity has even been looked at for plugging into the sector. So we are heavily dependent on soy, we're heavily dependent on wheat. We do have pea protein, we just don't have the processing steps in place. We don't have experts from like a filtration or a purification point of view, plugging in from global networks. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is to do a lot of tech transfer. So we're bringing in experts from Canada who do great work in pea protein to just come and really like work with scientists in the space and help them understand the value in working in the space. Another kind of tech barrier would also be like further along the supply chain in the texturization aspect. There's only one real twin screw extruder in the entire country, and that's really the tech that we need right now. There's also a lot of companies trying to do 3D printed meat. It's just way too expensive. We don't have that capacity. We also don't have infrastructure at levels that we really need. Like, we don't have it at like a pilot or a lab scale for entrepreneurs to just really go and experiment with a bunch of things. It exists in some obscure lab somewhere, and there's a lot of bureaucracy in terms of like getting access to that. So a lot of challenges in terms of really trialing and experimenting that is a huge bottleneck right now.
So asking again about funding, you mentioned patient capital, and that's very difficult to get. And I was wondering, how does the EA community, and especially EA organizations that do grant making, respond to smart protein investments on this? Do we see big investments from EA on this area, or is just not one of the priorities?
I'm not very sure. I had a conversation with OpenPhil yesterday, and I was asking them if they're animal welfare piece, how much of it plugs into alternative protein. And I would say it's one amongst 6 different things that they're focusing on. I wouldn't say it's like the top priority. We have been funded, GFI globally has been funded by EA for a long time. But that was quite initially when nobody really knew what all protein was, and EA was willing to take a bet on it. But right now I feel like a lot of the funding is going to come from sort of private family houses who are interested. That's what we're seeing, at least right now. We have a lot of like traditional commodities players who are trying to, like, I guess they're second, third generation entrepreneurs trying to plug into smart protein. They're also actively trying to advance the space. They're becoming investors in the space. They're trying to enter the space. So in India, a lot of the funding is looking like value chain stakeholders funding back into the sector, because we're at a stage where it's pre-competitive growth, like a rising tide lifts all boats. That's really what we're trying to do with GFI. Like when we build that community, every person is kind of willing to give out their information, give out services, because they know that it'll just advance the sector as a whole. If you're interested in any of the GFI initiatives, you can shoot me a mail, you can talk to me after, grab lunch, whatever. So yeah. All right, thanks everyone.